Where?
Here.
Why?
See how easy that is?
Yeah.
All right.
One time I played this one.
Adrian, hold on. I'm going to ask Adrian a question. Adrian,
What?
what did you make?
The same thing that I did for lunch.
Okay, so like
I'm okay.
like a turkey, cheese,
mayonnaise sandwich.
Okay.
Yeah. But grilled.
grilled.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I got a bite, remember? Yeah. I mean, I didn't.
Okay.
But sometimes we're gonna, most of the time, I think we're gonna break.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm not.
All right. Let's see if you say that next week. If you still want more responsibility. All right. Okay.
I want more responsibility.
Hi, Let's Ride listeners. Quick thing before we start. This podcast technically has a boss. His name is Adrian. He's 7. He checks the subscriber numbers every week. He sets aggressive targets. And I've been told just try harder is his full management philosophy. So follow or subscribe and tell a friend to do the same. It'll help me keep my job. And stick around, because this is a real-time journey, learning, parenting, work, life. I'm sorting through all of it out loud for your entertainment. So come on this journey with us. Now, let's ride. Our guest today was born and raised in India, the son of 2 doctors and a seemingly predestined career set for him, but decided to create his own path and becomes a merchant marine, living on ships, traveling the world, learning by doing. Then he walked away from a high-paying, stable career and came to the US to get his MBA. From there, he ran high-speed manufacturing lines and built a career in supply chain. But what makes this conversation different is how he thinks about life. We talk about self-awareness early on, knowing how you actually learn, and having the courage to walk away from paths that don't fit. We talk about taking risks the right way, building a safety net, then betting on yourself. And we get into the tensions he's lived with his entire life, between stability and exploration, between staying comfortable and chasing something bigger. There's a moment he describes, standing at a crossroads with a great career and a clear path forward, and still choosing to walk away because he knew if he stayed too long, he'd feel stuck. That's what this episode is about, not just career moves, but the decisions that shape the life that you actually want to live. Our guest today is Niraj Jha. Niraj, what's going on, man? I got to tell you, so to start, you and I work together, but one thing you and I have in common is we like talking stock market and things like that. About 5 minutes before I hit record on this, I had a sell for my QQQ index. And I'm just like, man, do I need to sell this? The heck's going on right now? We just hit a correction level. Are we going to hit a bear market? And I said, but I got this interview with Niraj. What do I do? And so I just pulled the trigger, man. I just sold off about 1/3 of the portfolio. I said, I don't know what the heck's going on with all this, geopolitical tension. So no one has a crystal ball, but you and I always tell you about my big trade. So I'll tell you about that one
Yeah, taking some risk off the table never hurts, especially if you've had a great 12 to 18 months. And, if you just take some money off the table, it's never a bad thing.
It's too scary.
I know everybody says that when it's scary, don't sell, buy. But ask that question when your portfolio starts dipping deep in the red.
Yeah. We won't get too deep into it, but I will say, I think I enjoy having those conversations with you because one, I feel like a lot of people don't, I think the stock market maybe scares them, or they're just kind of the type of investor that maybe puts in their 401k or they put it in an index fund and they just kind of set it and forget it. And long term, that's definitely the way to go. Just leave it alone. You're better off than just, looking at this stuff every day and making rash decisions like I might have just made and shooting yourself in the foot. But I do think there is something to understanding the broader, the levers that get pulled, the things that make it go up and down. And I think you've got a pretty good grasp on that. So where did that interest come from for you to just want to understand those things and why you have such a fascination with the stock market?
Oh, thank you for that question. And I'll give you the long version of the answer.
Give it to me, yeah.
So like as you rightly mentioned, right, putting something in a low cost index fund and forgetting about it, it's a tried and tested method. And some of the greatest investors have said that, hey, when you're dying, right before you are done with your life, if someone comes and tells you that for all the effort you took, you did not beat the index, how will you feel about it? If you will feel really bad about it, then don't do it. Don't touch this thing. Because most fund managers, forget about people who dabble in it as a hobby. Most professional fund managers will not beat the index.
Right.
So with that understanding, I'm going to come back to, why I care, right? So to me, this extends beyond just the money part of it to be able to truly understand how this world functions. And again, just like you, I've gone through a very formal set of education, the undergrad, the grad, and all of that good stuff. And I realized over time and that a lot of that education, while it kind of helped me scratch the surface, it didn't really help me understand how the world really functions. Unfortunately, stock market has really been that vehicle that has truly helped me understand how finances work. Now, I've paid a big price for it, but I look at it like my MBA. I spend a lot of money on my MBA, and similarly in this education, I've had some fair degree of hits and some wins. But all in all, what it has really helped me is that I function in this universe, and this universe goes around a very set of principles, and so many things happen that impact our life, not just short term but also long term. And then stock market sort of really becomes that mirror that helps you unravel what the hell is going on in the world. I never thought of myself as a finance person, but by simply dabbling into this space, and at times, it takes a certain degree of learning when your own money is at risk. Nothing
Right.
forces you to go out there and learn about interest rates, about Fed, about what exactly it means when FOMC cut rates. You could have said, hey, you could have learned all this 10 years ago in business school, but it doesn't sink in until you have your money on the line, until you're forced to learn. So to me, that's really what it's been about, right? It's really helped me mature as an individual. And I work in business, I work in supply chain and manufacturing, and it is all inherently tied together. So that's sort of my long drawn answer to what.
Yeah, it's like I think as you're talking, I'm thinking about this huge tangled ball of yarn, right? That's just that you're trying to unravel, and you take one string and you start to unravel, and it just tightens up a different area, and you loosen a little portion, you think you made progress, and then you have to reverse course. Like it's like that. And I think that's how most people think about it. And so then they just avoid it entirely. And when I look at your LinkedIn, for example, I mean, you're there trying to break down AI, you're there trying to break down automation, global supply chain. You even talk about farming and shipping and just so many concepts that I think for so many people is so complex. Like I said, they just decide not to address it at all. So I really respect the depth that you go in. You could tell that you spend a lot of time on your own just researching these different topics, probably going down rabbit holes, truly trying to understand these concepts. So you touched on it a little bit, but what is it that drives? It's like this constant thirst for education, it seems like. You mentioned like how that is in terms of impacting money, but you also mentioned the part that's not money related, which is just, hey, maybe not burying your head in the sand and just saying, hey, I'm not interested in what's going around me because it's too complicated. I truly want to understand this. Like, where do you think that drive for continued education comes from?
Thank you for those glowing notes about me.
Of course.
But to answer that question again, I'm not going to lie. I do get excited about a lot of this stuff at a very inherent level, right? So whether I make money using any of this or not, regardless, the fact that I live in a universe today, which I did not 20 years ago, knowledge was very much dated, right? 25 years ago, when I was in middle school and I wanted to participate in a quiz contest, the guy who had the best encyclopedias in his personal library would beat me because we did not live in this universe where your intent decided how much you can learn. So I inherently feel blessed about the fact that if I want to understand how small modular nuclear reactors work today, I will not be held back by my membership to a library or my ability to buy a $500 book. Now, I might not be able to build one, but hey, I had this question and I'm trying to answer this question to myself. So I really feel inherently excited about living in an ecosystem right now where a lot of things which was absolutely information, just gated information and it was impossible to find out is very much possible today. So I try to leverage that. that. One.
Right.
Number two, I've also have been blessed with having worked in very different facets of business. I started my career as a merchant marine. I used to work and live on ships, sail on ships. That sort of gave me a little bit of a perspective of the world. Then I ran high-speed manufacturing plants, and I've been in supply chain. I've been surrounded by so many different types of people across my lifespan that I am able to relate to a lot of these things, right? I am able to relate to a shift mechanic on what he struggles with while trying to fix a blow molder, as much as I'm able to relate to you, Paul Estrada, who's trying to buy billions of dollars worth of freight every year and make sure this complicated web of logistics fall together in a perfect place, understanding the macro. So, I've been blessed with having encountered so many different facets of people and life, and that kind of just keeps me excited, and I want to make sure I just keep adding fuel to it. So
yeah, and I think I want to, there's a lot of great talking points there. I'll go back to the first one, and that is the very fascinating perspective that I think today, and if you live in the United States, you take for granted the access to education and to Wikipedia and to everything, right? Like I never even thought about that because that's never been an issue for me. And we didn't touch on this yet, but I think maybe it's worth going there now, is that you were not born in the United States, right? You were born in India. And so I think you offer a very fascinating perspective of maybe a place where there's haves and have-nots everywhere, but, I think it's interesting. So I want to touch on that a little bit. And so I know we talked about, I actually just learned this recently, that I believe both of your parents were doctors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you are kind of you have this pedigree, maybe it's in your genes already. You are going to be a very intelligent person. So I'm going to just throw that out there. But even still, what I'm hearing from you is that even though you had very well-educated parents yourself, access to education and information was still hard to get. Is that right?
Yeah, that was pretty much, I'm talking pre-internet, right? And again, I'm going to give up my age here.
Yeah.
I was born in 1982, and I grew up in India, which was very much in line with the rest of the world. Still, the information age had not hit us. So like you mentioned, I was very privileged with my upbringing, having, been born in a home with 2 doctors, had an excellent set of just intellectually stimulating conversations, if you will. I also was blessed to have been born in a very special city in India that was synonymous with the industrial house of the Tatas. And I did have access to a lot of things that were considered not very accessible for the rest of the world, right? Whether it's stadiums or large libraries. So that really sort of set in motion my foundation for knowledge and for being able to continuously learn and be excited about what you are surrounded with. But to your point, yes, there was pre-Google. I could not just go ahead and access Wikipedia, Google. There were not that many YouTube content creators who would hold my hand and teach me about options. So I'm more of someone who learns where I'm in a collaborative space. So yeah, that definitely was something that I remember between now and then on how much that information age has helped me.
And I mentioned, you come from a family of 2 doctors, your mother and father both being doctors. How hard did they push education and this thirst for knowledge? Is that where the baseline came from, or was that just naturally within you already? Like I said, maybe it was just in your genes, or to what extent was that education piece maybe part of this foundation that seems to have carried on with you into adulthood?
That definitely has been a big inspiring force behind me. And, to be honest, I still struggle that I did not become a doctor.
Yeah.
My mom wanted me to be a doctor very much, but they never put any pressure on me. They let me be who I wanted to be. But I was surrounded by a lot of them. My mom was a doctor. My mom's younger sister was a doctor. Her husband was a doctor. And there was just a bunch of people where we grew up in an era where service to the society through education was one of the key themes, right? Now, I was a little bit more bent towards business and entrepreneurship, if you will. So if I look back, I still feel I grossly fell short, right?
I think it's interesting because it's like, I do feel like there's a lot of pressure in those, and this is from an outsider looking in. There's a lot of pressure to become a doctor, follow in your parents' footsteps. So I find it, one, fascinating that you had parents that said, hey, be your own person. But two, I'm curious to know from you, like when you literally are being I wouldn't say push because they're not pushing you, but like everything around you, your environment is telling you to become a doctor. Is part of it just like if you have like maybe a slightly defiant personality, or you have hey, I'm trying to be my own person? Like, what is it that when all these signs are pointing in this direction, that you decided to pivot and go a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I still think about it and I ponder over it. What made me do what I did? I went on this, I decided to go work on a ship very early on. I went to a Marine Academy. It was a very different decision. There was no ocean around where I stayed. Nobody in my family had ever heard of that profession. I had this bone in me which wanted to do different things. I wanted to go see the world, and that kind of career just stuck with me very early on. I personally had made that decision after a little bit of a research on what I wanted to do. And I still remember it. There was a lot of confusion in my family. Now, they were very supportive. There was a lot of confusion. Like, are you going to go work on a ship, a boat? Why would you want to do that to yourself? And I still remember there was a moment in time where I did feel a little bit validated. You never feel fully validated, but there was a moment in time where I was working on it was a brand new ship. We had just taken the ship's delivery from a shipyard in South Korea. And we were lucky enough to call on a port in Bombay. And because the ship was coming to India, I called my parents and said, hey, this is a great opportunity if you wanted to come see the ship. It's very rare. We don't often call on Indian ports. So they flew down from my city to Bombay, and there was a lot of arrangements made to come have them visit the ship. And I still remember that day when my mom walked down the engine room, and it was a spanking new ship. That helped. And she was like, wow, yeah. I didn't realize that you work in such a technologically advanced environment. This is awesome. I'm so proud of you. And that stays with me. So to answer your question, what took me down that path was not just my parents, just the city I grew up in. It was all about education and science. It was all about saying, hey, you're going to be a doctor, or you'll be an engineer and you will go crack the exam for IIT. That's pretty much everyone who was considered intellectually capable was expected to do. It was in the air, right? There was no way to escape it. From the time you were in 9th grade to the time you finished 12th grade, that's all the conversation was, right? People who made it through these esteemed universities were celebrated, like almost celebrities in the cities. Their names would be on papers. And growing up around that was not easy, right? Because I was like, man, I'm not sure I'll be able to do all of this, first of all, right? It is so damn competitive. But the part of me was also very, very much, infatuated by the ability to go out in the world, just visit different countries. I mean, yeah, some of it was very much me thinking smart, saying, do I really want to be a part of this craziness? Can I still go and achieve some professional success while meeting some of the core needs of my personality? And somehow that fit, because this was not a normal engineering college. It was more of a Marine Academy, very much like a military style of setup. And it was a lot of fun, right? It was very hard. But from the time I went on my first ship, I had that rush to be able to just go do things that nobody in my family had ever heard about. So yeah.
I think the part a lot of that stood out to me, but one thing in particular was, it sounds like you were driven by this thirst for exploration, right? So I'm assuming then that while your parents achieved these really great careers, it was, within your country or within, your locality, and that there was something pulling at you that said, hey, I want to get out and see the world and explore. And I think a lot of us have those inclinations or those thoughts that are pulling at us, but we just choose not to follow it. And I think you did. And so again, I just, the last thing I want to touch on with relation to this topic is you had this path that was probably pretty clear cut and set up for you. And it was I'm going to call it a guaranteed, I don't know if it was guaranteed, but more or less guaranteed path to success. And you kind of just said like, yeah, that may be the case, but I want to gamble a little bit. Let me go pull this card. And I don't know where it's going to take me, but at least I feel like I'm going to be a little bit more fulfilled, at least in the short term. Was there any fear in your mind that crept in? And what do you think was ultimately the the one thing that you're just like, no, I really just have to do this?
No, I mean, you definitely hit a point there, right? And I would say that when I go back and some of that memories are like crystal clear in my head. Some of those days like literally come back to me like this I had a very restless bone in me. It was very difficult for me to just sit in a place and be in an extended state of, even though I love knowledge, but I really, that was one of the things that defined my personality, right? From very early on. I learned better while doing things. I learned better by being surrounded by people who were doing things versus sort of just being with the book alone and trying to do that. So if I were to sum it up in one word, I would say self-awareness. I did have a very high degree of self-awareness. And wherever there was a lack of in my personality, whether it comes to being able to just very much focus on intellectual pursuit in a one-on-one basis, I try to compensate it with my self-awareness. Now, going back all of these years, you were absolutely right. I had this really restless bone in me, wanted to get out of that small city I was born in, go see the world. A lot of it came from my dad, right? My dad had his undergrad education in Europe, and a big chunk of his medical education was over there, and he still came back. He was very clear that he never wanted to live there. And I had always seen his pictures growing up, and those were not the kind of pictures you see on the phone now, where the light from the photo is kind of taken away. These are like weird sizes, tucked away in files, and then you just sometimes sit around and watch all of this. And that had a very, very big impact on how I saw the world. I literally saw the world through those pictures, with those bell bottoms and long hairs and people looking just different. And I was like, man, you must have had a good experience. And he never lied about it. He was like, yeah, it was an awesome experience. I loved every bit of being an international student in an unknown country, having to learn a foreign language. And, he had grown up in a village. He had not grown up in a city like me. So for him, that sort of bridge was even more crazy. So a lot of that set my first pillar of decision making, where I was like, I absolutely have to go out and experience the world. That's a must. And then from there on, I had a lot of misgivings about how to get there. Believe it or not, when I was still in my 10th grade, I ended up answering the SAT exams for the US education.
Okay.
Having no idea what to do with it. But I just did it, right? And I was like, so that thing was already there. But when I did decide to go on the ship, a lot of my misgivings and fears were around, I have no idea what happens there. Will I survive? I don't know anybody, not one soul who could tell me that, hey, this is how this works. And from there on, once I got in, I was very clear that I had to clear my licenses. That career is governed by STCW licenses, which is a very hard set of exams and orals governed by governments. And you cannot go work on a ship as a watchkeeping officer unless you clear that. So once I was sort of halfway through it, I was like, I want to build this base for myself. And once I have built this base, I can take on a lot more risks so that I always can fall back here.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a really important thing that I want to go back to again. I feel like you keep going back, but you just, so many gems in here. And the one thing there was, I think as parents, you don't necessarily have to explicitly say something in words for your kids to pick up on thoughts and ideas that you're giving out. And so when you're saying that, I was thinking about my own upbringing, and that was, my dad was a police officer, and he would come home and just rave about how much he loved that job. Like, we would literally be sitting at the dinner table and he would just be telling these very, very interesting, high energy, like adventurous stories about something that he had done at work the previous day. And it had gotten to the point where my mom was just like, hey, no more police stories at the dinner table. But we were as kids, we were fascinated by it. And same thing with his military experience. He was in the U.S. Marine Corps, and he would glorify and talk about his experience there. So much so that I saw no other, and again, he never said, Paul, go to the military, Paul, go become a police officer. Just in the way that he had told those stories, it had kind of become, in my mind, that like, okay, well, you've lived this really exciting, fulfilled life, and you've been able to provide for your family in a way that is, really above average. And so that's really checking a lot of boxes here. Why would I not want to follow exactly in your footsteps and do that? Because, right? And so I never had that conversation with him until it got to a point where was getting ready to graduate from college, and I tell my dad I'm going to go apply for the Brea Police Department. He's like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, I mean, what did you expect? Like, I've been hearing about this, my whole life. And he said, no. The whole idea of you going to college was so that you wouldn't do this. And I said, okay, I'm confused then, because like you've been talking this up for so long. And so I guess my point there is just, we get excited as parents about different things. And I don't think we even realize that we are inherently giving these ideas to our children, and we don't necessarily know which of those ideas they're picking up on, but they are picking up on some of them. And we don't know how that's going to manifest itself as they become older. But until they tell us a story of, well, hey, Dad, I remember when I was 8 years old and this happened. I'm like, oh, shoot, that was like an afterthought in my mind. But to them, it was like this very seminal moment that like set the career trajectory of their lives, right? Am I thinking too big about that, or does that make sense?
When you say it like that, as a parent now, it even scares me, right? That's so much of what our kids absorbs are just like subconscious stuff that's happening around them. But you bring up an excellent point, and there's definitely there's a lot to it. Not just about life, but about parenting, about being humble as a parent, and you thinking that, hey, this is what I'm telling my child, but the child ends up perceiving something else more based on what they are seeing. No, you are 100% right there, and like I said, it's a little bit scary once you become a parent to realize 20-30 years down the line, when your kid would be sitting in an interview like that somewhere, I wonder what they would be saying.
Exactly. We just got to be on our best behavior and hope for the best. So, all right. So we've established that you are an explorer. You're an adventure seeker. You said you're the restless bones in your body. You spent a couple years sailing the world, and eventually you find your way to the United States, going to business school. What kind of triggered the thought of, okay, you'd started this career. I don't know if you liked it or not, or you just said, okay, you know what, this has run its course. Now it's time for me to go get more educated. And specifically, I want to go get educated in the United States. Or how did that come about?
That was one of the most thought through, but at the same time, difficult decisions for me. I still very much remember standing at that sort of a precipice of that decision, if you will, and thinking, should I go or should I not? I had a great career. I was making a lot of money. I was a relatively young kid in India, earning in US dollars. Life was really good. I'm not going to lie about it, right? I still remember so many different snippets from that life that made me feel just like I've arrived. But, there was always that element in me where I knew that if I extended it beyond a certain point, living would be impossible. I mean, this is a profession that as you graduate and get more licenses and become more senior on a ship, you do get paid a lot. There is a lot of prestige associated with it. The stickiness of the job is like 500 million%. You literally have to just pick up the phone and tell someone, hey, I want to be on a ship. And the next moment you are on a ship. That's just how that profession works. Wow. But like I said, there was a piece of me that felt restricted, being more technically focused on a ship, and I wanted to get exposed to more larger ecosystem of how business runs, how the world runs. And there were multiple universities across the world that I considered, primarily driven by the fact that I had some of my own money saved up. So that really made me feel very liberated to screw it up, in lack of other words, right? I had the liberation to say, okay, what's the worst that'll happen? I'll go somewhere, mess it all up, destroy all my money, but it's still my money. I'm not going to take a single penny alone. And then I'm just going to come back, work on a ship. Worst case, right? That's sort of how I got that freedom to make that choice, right? And I looked at different universities across the world. One of the things that kept bringing me back to the US was, again, I always considered it the mecca of capitalism. I was like, hey, you want to be in business, you want to make money. Why are you even thinking about another country? There's a lot of great countries, including from where I come from. But what I was looking for was more to be able to get exposure to the global business ecosystem. And having English as a primary language definitely helped versus, let's say, picking a European country where I would have at least never been a native speaker. And I'm still not. I have a heavy accent, but still I can converse in that language. I've always been able to. So, I mean, I always had a soft corner for here. Like I said, I'd answered SAT when I was in 10th grade. I've always been a huge fan of basketball.
Right.
I've grown up watching basketball even in India. There were so many different facets of life here that I kind of felt connected to just beyond the education and business aspect of it. And when I did apply to universities, most of the universities I applied to were in the US. So if I applied to, let's say, 10 or 15, almost 70, 80% of them were US based. I got a couple of admissions. There was something that stood out. That word was California. I was like, man, this is a brand, probably bigger than many brands. And that's what made me choose. I wanted to be closer to an ocean. Not that I surf or anything, but that was just a thought. I liked that idea. And that's how I ended up at UCI.
Yeah, UCI. So University of California, Irvine in Orange County. And it's probably the most, I've talked about this area before, but the most manicured, like no blade of grass is out of place. It's just like almost like a movie set. So I'm curious, and I've seen pictures of where you grew up in India. Very different. So I'm just curious, like what the culture shock was like, kind of coming specifically to that. I mean, because you could go to any area, right? But that area specific is like the complete, like highest end you could possibly get to. What do you remember about those early days of just kind of exploring this new environment and what was going through your head at that time?
Boy, I struggled. I struggled big time in being able to, I mean, when I came here, I had all of these ideas about university in a foreign country and everything around it. Obviously, I wanted the education, but I also wanted the fun. And I struggled in the sense that everything felt so sanitized. I came from a very sort of a high energy, high tempo ecosystem. I was working on a ship, which was sort of chaos. Is this the best way to describe it? I would wake up in a different country so many times. I would just go out, be all night, and then continue to work in the engine room. That's just the tempo of life I had. Even when I was in India, there was just hyperactivity all the time. Between the small town I lived in to the different cities I had to go and sort of set up base in to be able to work in this career. And there was just so much going on. There was so much travel involved. There was so much high tempo activity. You generally never slept at 9 p.m. And when I came here, it was everything but that. I arrived in a beautiful village where everything shut down at 9 p.m. and people would just happily leave a party at 9:30 or 10 saying, hey, I got to walk my dog at 5 a.m. No hate there. It was just, I was shocked. I was like, man, how am I going to survive here? I won't be able to take this silence. I will not be able to just like, did I make a mistake? So yeah, my first year, I mean, I thought about it multiple times that just forget the education, forget everything that's good that will come out of it. I might not be able to take this. This is just too soft, too slow. Things are not moving at the pace at which I've been used to. But then again, you kind of become more of a professional from that point. You start looking at the greater good. You start understanding that it's a good school. You are surrounded by some good companies and people. And then, life kind of becomes really busy and you let go of that social part of it. But that was one of my biggest struggles. I mean, people don't realize that when you immigrate or you leave behind everything that you had, the emotional impact of it is just sometimes catastrophic, especially if things were awesome, especially if you were surrounded by a lot of friends, family, a lot of good things, a lot of positive vibes, and all of a sudden you're just completely cut off all of that, right? And it is, I'd say, that's the price you pay. And you don't realize it when you're doing it. But then when you look back, you sometimes ask yourself, how the hell did I emotionally survive that? I have no idea. But yeah, that was a pretty much of a shock to me.
Well, I think this topic fascinates me because, and I just talked about this as related to my college experience, and that is I was born in California. I was born in Southern California specifically. I grew up in Southern California. I went to college in Southern California. In fact, I just talked about how my college was maybe a 30-40 minute drive from my childhood home. And I graduated from university. The first job I took was at Niagara, which was 30-40 minutes from my home, right? So aside from a 6-month stint I did in Spain for a study abroad, the vast majority of my life has been spent literally like almost like a stone's throw from the hospital I was born in, right? So I've stayed within this bubble, so to speak, and it's a great bubble. I mean, it's California and everything, but the part that is most important is that familial aspect, and that is this idea of being able to be near your friends and family, your brothers and sisters and your grandparents, your extended family, right? And just the richness that can bring to your life. And so one of the things I always think about, especially, like where we work, where there's a lot of people there that were born from outside of the US, or just anybody that's immigrating, like you said, that is sacrificing so much to go, thousands of miles away, maybe 10, 15-hour time zones away to explore careers and making these lives for themselves, which is great. And I think they're able to achieve that, but it is coming at a price. And that price is missing key milestones in your family's lives, birthdays, anniversaries, potentially even death of family members that you're just not there. And thankfully, because of technology, you can FaceTime with people and there's so many ways to stay connected, but there's nothing that's going to be just physically being there, being able to give your family member a hug or spend a couple hours over a bottle of wine or whatever the case may be. So I should say I understand that at the surface level. I would love to go into more depth into, and you touched on it, like that emotional aspect a little bit, but what does that truly feel like? And two, that seems like a massive sacrifice. And has it been worth it? Right? That's ultimately the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an evolving question, right? And I could have 5 different answers on 5 different days. But to sum it all up, right? I mean, you rightly said it, that when you're young, for a lot of us who have grown up in small town India, we get programmed pretty early to leave home, right? I left home at 18 it was a 28-hour train journey from where I was born to where I studied college for 4 years, right? We kind of leave home early in that sense. Ability to be able to separate yourself from your personal life for a greater good. And at times, it's not even driven by any desperate measures. It's not even driven by that, hey, if I don't leave, my life is horrible. It's just a constant evolving process. And that's just what you've seen around you of constantly trying to, yeah.
Well, let me touch on that real quick, Niraj. So it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but it's interesting you say that, because when you talk about programming, right, and we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but my experience of programming was exactly the opposite, where like literally my parents were like, if you want to live in this house until you're 30, you're welcome to do that. So I'm fascinated by this concept of being programmed to actually leave home. And just like very briefly, like what does that look like when you say that?
I'm only speaking from a perspective of someone who grew up in a small town India, right? And that perspective they're very different for someone who grew up in big cities. Like you mentioned, people who generally are born and brought up in big cities, they tend to have very little to no reason to leave. The big companies are there, big universities are there, good jobs are there, and they kind of have that thought process that, hey, everybody comes here. I don't really have to go anywhere. But for a lot of us who grew up in very small cities in India, it was very early on sort of a known fact. If you have to do anything substantial professionally, you have to pack up and leave. First you leave for education, and then you leave for maybe a job or entrepreneurship or whatever, wherever your career takes you. It was almost considered sort of a rite of passage, if you will. It was almost considered something that you very proudly wore on your sort of as an accolade that, hey, I left, I didn't just stay back. And you don't realize a lot of this stuff when it's happening. But 10, 15, 20 years down the line, when you look back, and you meet so many more people, because back then you are in a bubble of your own small town and everybody around you is thinking exactly the same. When you grow up and you meet more people, you're like, oh, a lot of people don't have to leave. Is that real? Like,
right.
I thought everybody has to leave, right? And it seems kind of stupid and funny to say it like that. But there were moments like that where I was like, oh, wait, okay, so this is not that normal. Like, you could potentially have a life where you were born in a city, you educated in a city, and you worked there, surrounded by a large group of friends and family. And then that's when a lot of that sort of your life's decisions starts sort of setting in. You're like, oh, I don't know, did I do the right thing? Was it all worth it? What did I set out to achieve? And a lot of times you will see that there is this inherent dissatisfaction in a lot of people who sort of come from that ecosystem, because they're always trying to prove, they're always trying to compensate for everything that they lost. And at times always trying to answer to themselves, I didn't need to do that. Why did I do that? I wasn't escaping a war-torn country, or I wasn't just being persecuted or anything. It was very much a choice I made. How do I continue to make up for it? And that inherent dissatisfaction is sometimes a positive and sometimes it's a negative, right? It's positive where it drives you to constantly never settle and say, oh, I have a great job, but I don't feel it. I really need to go and grab something else because I really want to make it all worth it. But at times it also becomes negative where it doesn't let you enjoy what you have achieved. It doesn't let you just settle in and say, wow, man, it's been a long and hard road. And can I just take a breather and just smile and be happy?
Yeah.
It's
right.
It's quite a thing. Where you're always trying to overcompensate.
And so now you're 15, 20 years into that decision. You're still here. How do you kind of, and you still have a long, I mean, you're a young guy still, so you got a long career left ahead of you. But as you kind of think about the next, I don't know, 10, 15 years, what does that look like to you in the context of, okay, you're pretty well established. You almost lived half your life now in the United States as opposed to India, right? So what does that like mean for you going forward? I don't know where you're at with like family and stuff that's still in India, but have you like come to terms with like, okay, this is a rock solid path. I'm firmly going in this direction, or are you still kind of like, I don't like, we'll kind of see.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could answer that with that level of clarity. But I'll break it down into two different facets: the professional piece and the personal piece. The personal piece, I've kind of come more or less to a realization. I would say that I've accepted it, that the place I left 15, 20 years ago, that doesn't even exist. It just exists in my mind. Everything around it has changed. I am holding on to this vestige of something that is not even there anymore, right? The city I grew up in, the people I grew up with, the emotions, stories, everything has just rapidly evolved, changed. And if I keep trying to go, and I still try to go there as much as I can, looking for it, longing for it, and I come back.
You mean going there in your mind, right?
No, I physically also go to India
a
lot, almost at least once a year.
Okay.
And a lot of times it's that longing that takes you back there to look for stuff that was there. All your golden memories are there. And then it takes you a while to realize that it doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah.
It's all in your head. And wherever you are is where your home is. It doesn't matter what part of the world or what part of the country. Like, people have grown up in small cities in India, but they have moved on to bigger cities, which looks nothing like how they grew up. So
Right.
while countries are separated by passports and boundaries, in a lot of senses, their experiences are also very similar of being displaced, right? And so on a personal level, after a while, you do come to a realization that thing doesn't exist. It's in your head. It's a sweet little memory, and you can
Right.
preserve it, but trying to go and relive it will really not get you anywhere. Wherever you are is where you need to set up your roots, set up your memories, and just like you had those memories, your kids will now have these memories to kind of go back to wherever they are 20 years down the line. So that's on the personal front. I very much sort of aligned to the fact that I'm a nomad. And while I am here today, I love it here. This is where I have my family. I have both my kids here. I'm very much emotionally connected to this space now. But also at the same time, I know a part of me will always be searching for that, right? Now on the professional front, right? As you would know, because you have gone through a similar process of growth, it gets more and more complicated as you hit a certain level to answer that question, what's next? A part of you wants to acknowledge what you have achieved. A part of you wants to celebrate that, which is absolutely something that should be done, to be thankful for what I've built, not just myself, but with the grace of the company that I work with, right? I've been very fortunate, very blessed with the leaders that have granted me these opportunities. But at the same time, you are always trying to answer that question. Will I be satisfied 20 years later if I were to say that, hey, I said this is great, this is awesome, let me just go in a sense of preservation? And that answer to me is always a hard no. I can never accept that.
Right.
And whether the reality might not align with my own fascination with constant growth, I just can't stop thinking about it, right? And like I said, 10 years down the line, 10 years before, those answers were pretty simple. So I was a maintenance supervisor at one point in a manufacturing plant, and I had a very clear goal. I want to be plant director. Right? It was pretty black and white. Now, whether I could become one or not is a different story. But the target was set. You load it, and you're like, let's go. There was a point where I was like, I want to do well in HQ. These are some of the targets I want to achieve. Now, from there on, where you are surrounded by some very smart people, and growth won't happen on a yearly basis, it again becomes inherently complicated. Do you see growth by constantly learning more? Do you see growth by exposing yourself to a higher caliber of work? Do you see growth by just doing something completely out of the blue and risk a lot? Don't have an answer to it.
Right.
But 100% I can say that I continue to think on how to just accentuate this.
Right.
And build on top of it.
Well, Niraj, I think you've had just, a fascinating story to tell, and the adventure, the explorer in you is really interesting to learn that. I'm curious, just to kind of come full circle, you've got young children of your own now. As you think about your role as a father and just being a parent, and you think about your own journey that you've been on, how do you think about their journey and where they're going? I know, they're still relatively young, but just in terms of what you would like to see for them and how, what they take away from your journey to maybe, I don't know, I kind of feel like maybe I always think about it in terms of standing on your shoulders and getting to the next level. But how do you think about those things?
Oh, you saved the hardest question.
Of course, always.
Whenever I talk to my dad these days, I make sure I acknowledge that you don't know how hard it is to be a parent until you become a parent, right? You just go through so much of your life listening to people about things their parent did or did not do for them, the missed opportunities they had because of their parents. And there's just so much around it, right? There's always focused on critique. And then you yourself are standing in that role, and every day feels like a constant question, to me at least personally, I'm speaking very personally here, on whether I'm doing the right things. You're battling this battle between what you want your kids to become, but at the same time, asking yourself, am I giving them the right incentives? Am I giving them the right emotions to be able to get there? Also trying to, at the same time, figure out that maybe they have nothing to do what I want them to become, and being able to just reconcile everything. You come in from this very high-powered zone of having just built your career. You're kind of just teeming with energy. You're like, man, I figured this out. I do not want them to make a single mistake I made. Literally, I have the template. Just take the template, run with it. I have screwed up so many times, and I have it all written down. This is that's it. You just have to follow the template. And then you're like, oh man, they're not following the template at all.
There's no fun in that. Hell? Come on. Yeah.
And then you go through that humbling process. At least it was, for me, it was quite a process to be able to then acknowledge that, okay, well, you're talking about it from the vantage point of someone who has seen so much, and trying to just give somebody, it just probably is not the best way to do it. They will have to go through their own life's experiences. They will stumble and fall. You only hope that they stumble and fall less than you. You only hope that they look at you and say, hey, you know what? My dad's been through this. I kind of know how this works out. I'm not going to take that road, or I will take that road, right? And there's so much hopes and aspirations. And it's almost like, how VCs start off and they're like, we don't know what the outcome will be, but then they put in a bunch of investment and effort and everything. To me, I have come to a realization to look at it in a similar way, with a huge dose of humility, and say that a lot of what I want might not be. So let me try to just sort of stand around, see where I can help, and let this thing play out. Now it's very difficult for someone who has tried to control my own careers, who has tried to control a lot of narrative around, how things shape up in my life, to be that person. But like I said, my hope and aspirations are all focused on more basic things, is their general health, their mental health, them being able to be decent human beings. And as life plays out, if they check box these 3 or 4 things, a lot of their actualization, a lot of their fulfillment sort of will be self-correcting in a sense. They will, I'm hoping, get where they have to get if they take care of these 3 basic things.
All right. Well, Niraj, I really appreciate you. I get to your knowledge on a daily basis. I'm fortunate enough to spend time with you in the office every day, but I'm really happy to be able to share you with the rest of my audience. And so thank you for your time. And, next week we're going to have to figure out this whole stock situation because we're getting a little nervous. So we got a lot to talk about next week. But thank you for sharing your story. It was very fascinating. I appreciate it.
It's been very fortunate to know you, Paul. I've known you for a while from our early days. I've always enjoyed my conversations with you, learned a lot from you. And just the fact that you are continuing to expand your horizons by doing like a podcast like this, right? It inspires me. That's the kind of stuff that makes me want to get out of bed and say, hey, you know what? I got something to learn from this person. I want to take a leaf of I want to take a book or, leaf out of his book. And so it's always been a great experience. And I'd like to thank you for having me here.
Yeah, anytime. All right, man. We'll talk next week.
All right. And now that you've sold your triple Qs, we'll be on close watch.
We'll see.
Maybe this is the bottom.
We'll talk next week. We'll see. All right. See you.
All right, man. Thank you so much, Paul.